My brother, Mark, and we were always thick as thieves growing up. Even though he's 5 years younger, almost a decade now, the bond we forged over scraped knees and shared secrets in our childhood home felt unbreakable. Mom always said I was the responsible one, the steady ship in our little family's sometimes stormy sea. And I didn't mind. I liked being the one people could count on, especially Mark. He had a way of looking at you with those big, puppy dog eyes that could melt even the coldest heart, and honestly, mine never stood a chance. Now, at 48, life had thrown its share of curveballs, the biggest being raising my Emily, my firecracker of a daughter, on my own since she was 6. It wasn't easy, juggling 2 part-time jobs, waitressing at the diner downtown and cleaning houses on the side. But Emily was my everything. And for years we'd shared a dream. A little house with a yard where she could finally have a dog and I could plant a real garden. Not just the sad little pots on our apartment balcony. Every spare dollar, every unexpected tip, went straight into our house fund jar. A chipped ceramic pig Emily had painted years ago. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. A tangible symbol of our future. Mark knew all about it. He'd even teased me about my piggy bank obsession at the last family barbecue. A sweltering affair in July at Mom's place. I can still picture it so clearly. The smell of charcoal and Mom's famous potato salad hanging heavy in the humid air. Kids shrieking with laughter as they chased each other around the patchy lawn. Mark, leaning against the porch railing, a can of beer in his hand, looking relaxed and carefree in a way I envied. He just started a new business venture. Something involving online marketing, and he was full of optimistic talk about finally hitting it big. "So, how's the little piggy doing, sis?" he'd asked, a playful smirk on his face. "Getting fatter?" I'd replied, wiping sweat from my brow with the back of my hand. Slowly but surely, he'd clapped me on the shoulder, his touch surprisingly firm. "You'll get there, Sarah. You always do. You're the most determined person I know." His words had felt genuine, supportive. He'd even offered to help me look at houses online, saying he had a knack for finding hidden gems. We'd spent a good hour scrolling through listings on my phone. Emily perched between us, pointing out every house with a swing set. It was a good day, one of those easy, familiar days where family felt like the safest, most reliable thing in the world. Mark had always been a bit of a dreamer, always chasing the next big thing. He'd had more jobs than I could count, selling insurance, flipping furniture, even trying his hand at being a DJ for a while. I'd often lent him money over the years, small amounts here and there to tide him over between gigs. He was my brother, after all, and I always believed he'd pay me back when he could. Sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't. I'd learned to factor it in, a silent tax on our sibling bond. But lately, something felt different. Over the past few weeks, Mark had become elusive. He'd stopped by less frequently, his usual Sunday afternoon visits dwindling to sporadic texts. When I did manage to catch him on the phone, his conversations felt rushed, vague. He'd talk about important meetings and closing deals. But when I pressed for details, he'd brush me off with a laugh, saying I wouldn't understand the complexities of his work. There was one evening, about a week ago, when I called him to ask if he wanted to catch a movie. He answered on the third ring, his voice tight. "Hey Sarah, can't talk right now. I'm out of town." "Out of town? Where'd you go?" I'd asked, a little surprised. He hadn't mentioned any trips. "Just a quick business trip," he'd said, his tone a little too casual. "I'll tell you all about it when I get back." He never did. When I brought it up a few days later, he'd simply shrugged it off, saying it wasn't important. Then there was the time I saw him at the grocery store just a couple of days ago. I'd waved, calling his name, but he'd seemed to deliberately avoid eye contact, quickly turning down another aisle. I'd felt a strange prickle of unease then, a feeling that something wasn't quite right. Maybe it was just stress, I told myself. Mark was probably just overwhelmed with his new business. But a small, persistent voice in the back of my mind whispered that it was more than that. It was a feeling I couldn't quite shake, a subtle tremor in the foundation of our seemingly solid brother-sister relationship, and it was starting to make me worry. The day I finally felt ready to make an offer on the little blue house with the fenced-in yard, the one Emily had declared perfect, because it had a huge oak tree just begging for a tire swing. I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The piggy bank was heavier than it had ever been, a testament to countless double shifts and meticulously packed lunches. I'd even treated myself to a new notepad and pen, ready to jot down all the important details. I called my realtor, Mrs. Henderson, a sweet lady with a no-nonsense attitude, her voice always warm and encouraging. "Ready to take the plunge, Sarah?" she'd asked, and I could practically hear her smile through the phone. "I think so, Mrs. Henderson," I'd replied, my own smile wide. "I'm really liking that one on Elm Street." "Oh, the blue one. Lovely house. Let's schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning, and we can go over the paperwork." That night, I could barely sleep, my mind buzzing with images of Emily's face when I told her the news. I imagined her running through the yard with a puppy, the smell of freshly cut grass filling the air. It was so close, I could almost taste it. The next morning, I woke up with a nervous flutter in my stomach, the good kind of nervous, like before a big presentation or a first date. I made myself a strong cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table to quickly check my bank balance online, just to be absolutely sure everything was in order before my meeting with Mrs. Henderson. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, my heart doing a little happy dance. I typed in my password, waited for the page to load, and then the world tilted. The number on the screen swam before my eyes. Couldn't be right. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. The balance was minuscule, barely enough to cover a week's groceries, let alone a down payment on a house. My breath hitched in my throat. My hands started to tremble. This had to be a mistake. Maybe the system was down. I refreshed the page again and again, but the number remained stubbornly, terrifyingly low. Panic clawed its way up my chest, a cold, suffocating wave. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Had there been some kind of error? Had my account been hacked? I frantically scrolled through the recent transactions, my eyes scanning for anything unusual, and then I saw it. A series of large withdrawals, starting a few weeks ago, with vague descriptions like online transfer and debit purchase. The amounts were staggering, thousands of dollars gone, vanished into thin air. My blood ran cold. This wasn't an error. This was something else, something much, much worse. My first instinct was to call the bank, my fingers fumbling with my phone. But then, a different thought, a sickening suspicion, began to take root in my mind. The timing, Mark's recent behavior, his sudden business trip, that never happened. I remembered him asking about my savings at the barbecue. His seemingly supportive words now echoed in my ears with a sinister new meaning. Could it be? Could Mark have? No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't do that to me, to Emily. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing rapidly, fueled by the cold, hard evidence on my screen. I tried to call Mark, my hand shaking so badly I could barely dial the numbers. It rang and rang, going straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice tight with forced calm. "Mark, it's me. Call me as soon as you get this. It's important." Hours crawled by, each one stretching into an eternity. Couldn't eat, couldn't focus. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the blank wall, the weight of the missing money pressing down on me like a physical burden. Finally, late in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Mark. I answered immediately, my voice trembling slightly despite my efforts to remain composed. "Hey, Sarah, what's up?" he said, his tone surprisingly casual, like nothing was wrong. "Mark," I began, my voice barely a whisper. "My savings. It's almost all gone." There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then he said, a little too quickly, "What? Gone? That's terrible. Did you call the bank? Maybe it's a mistake." His feigned surprise felt like a punch to the gut. It was so unconvincing, so transparent. "I checked the transactions, Mark," I said, my voice gaining a bit more strength, laced with a growing sense of dread. "There were large withdrawals starting a few weeks ago." He hesitated again, and in that brief silence I knew. I just knew. "Look, Sarah," he finally said, his tone shifting, becoming more defensive. I can explain. Explain what, Mark? Explain how thousands of dollars disappeared from my account. Okay. Just hear me out, he pleaded. I borrowed it. The words hung in the air, heavy and sickening. Borrowed it? Without asking? Without even telling me? Borrowed it. I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. Borrowed my down payment, Mark? The money Emily and I have been saving for years. I was going to tell you, he mumbled. The opportunity came up so fast. It was a sure thing, Sarah, a real game changer. I was going to invest it, make a quick profit, and pay you back even more than I took. His flimsy excuse felt like a slap in the face. A sure thing? With my life savings? What kind of opportunity, Mark? I asked, my voice dangerously low. He launched into a rambling explanation about some online venture, full of jargon and vague promises. It sounded like a scam, a desperate attempt to justify his actions. So, you just took it? I interrupted, cutting through his spiel. You just emptied my account without a word? I needed it, Sarah, he said, his voice taking on a whiny edge. You know how things have been. This was my chance to finally get ahead. And what about my chance, Mark? I countered, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. What about Emily's chance? That money wasn't mine to gamble with. It was for our future. I was going to pay it back, he insisted. I promise. Just give me a little time. How much time, Mark? I asked, the reality of his betrayal hitting me like a physical blow. The blue house, the tire swing, Emily's excited face. All of it felt like it was slipping through my fingers. A few days later, I ran into Mrs. Davison, a chatty neighbor of Mom's, at the grocery store. We exchanged pleasantries, and then she said, her eyes twinkling, "Oh, Sarah, I saw your brother the other day. He was showing off a fancy new watch. Said he'd just closed a big deal with his online business. Seems like he's finally made it." Her innocent comment landed like a punch to the gut. A fancy new watch? While my dreams were crumbling. While my account was empty, the pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. The lucrative investment opportunity wasn't some grand business venture. It was a lie. Mark had simply taken my money and was spending it on himself, probably on that watch, maybe on who knows what else. The heartbreaking moment came not during that phone call, but right there in the middle of the canned goods aisle, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. It was the crushing realization that the brother I had always trusted, the one I had always supported, had not only stolen my money but had also lied to my face, without a shred of remorse. The betrayal was so profound, so callous. It felt like a part of me had shattered right there amongst the soup and the vegetables. The dependable one, the steady ship. I had been so busy taking care of everyone else. I hadn't seen the storm brewing right under my own roof. And now I was drowning. The drive home from the grocery store was a blur of angry tears and choked sobs. The image of Mrs. Davison's cheerful face, coupled with her innocent remark about Mark's new watch, kept flashing in my mind, each repetition twisting the knife a little deeper. It wasn't just the money. It was the blatant disregard, the casual cruelty of his actions. He hadn't just borrowed from me. He'd stolen from our future, from Emily's dreams. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of our apartment building, the initial shock had begun to solidify into a cold, hard anger. The tears had stopped, replaced by a steely resolve. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I wasn't going to be the dependable one who just shrugged and moved on. This time was different. This time he'd crossed a line. I marched into our small, cluttered apartment, the silence amplifying the turmoil inside me. Emily was at her friend Chloe's house, thankfully spared from witnessing my unraveling. I needed to think, to formulate a plan. I paced the length of the living room, my mind racing, replaying every conversation, every interaction with Mark over the past few weeks, searching for clues I'd missed. Later that evening, after Emily was home and tucked into bed, I called Mark again. This time, my voice was calm, devoid of the raw emotion from our previous conversation. "Mark," I said, my tone flat, "we need to talk. In person." He hesitated, Look, Sarah, I told you I'm gonna pay you back. Just give me some time. No, Mark, I insisted. This isn't about time anymore. This is about trust. And you've broken it. I told him I'd meet him at our usual spot, the little coffee shop on Main Street, the next morning. He grumbled but eventually agreed. Sleep didn't come easy that night. My mind was a battlefield of hurt and anger. But beneath it all, a flicker of something new was starting to ignite. A sense of self-preservation I hadn't felt in a long time. The next morning, I arrived at the coffee shop early, choosing a table in the back corner. When Mark finally shuffled in, looking rumpled and avoiding my gaze, I was already there, a steaming mug of coffee clutched in my hands. So, he began, his voice low. What's so urgent? I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I saw not my charming, sometimes irresponsible little brother, but someone who had deliberately taken advantage of my trust and generosity. The realization felt like a cold shower, shocking me into a new clarity. The down payment, Mark, I said, my voice steady. All of it. It's gone. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I told you I borrowed it. I had a good reason. A good reason to steal from your sister? I countered, my voice rising slightly. A good reason to jeopardize my daughter's future? He sighed dramatically. Don't make it sound like I'm some kind of monster, Sarah. I would never intentionally hurt you or Emily. But you did, Mark, I said, my voice firm. You took thousands of dollars that weren't yours, and you lied about it. He started to launch into another one of his flimsy explanations, but I cut him off. I know about the watch, Mark. Mrs. Davison saw you. The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. So, tell me, Mark, I continued, my voice laced with a bitter sarcasm. Was that part of your sure-thing investment? Or was that just a little bonus for yourself, courtesy of your dependable big sister? He finally met my gaze, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by his usual defensiveness. Look, I needed it. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. This business is make or break for me. And buying a home is make or break for me and Emily, Mark, I retorted. You knew that. You knew how much that money meant to us. He leaned forward, his voice softening, attempting his usual manipulation tactics. Come on, Sarah. You always help me out. You've always been there for me. Can't you just trust me on this one? I promise I'll pay you back. I just need a little more time. The familiar guilt trip washed over me, the ingrained response to his pleas threatening to weaken my resolve. But then I thought of Emily, of her hopeful face as we looked at that blue house, of the years of sacrifice I'd made to save that money. And the guilt turned into a steely determination. No, Mark, I said, my voice firm and unwavering. Not this time. This isn't a small loan to tide you over. This is our future you've gambled with. He looked at me, a mixture of disbelief and anger in his eyes. So what are you going to do, Sarah? Call the cops on your own brother. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence hang in the air. Then, I reached into my purse and pulled out a small, worn notebook. I flipped it open to a page with some scribbled notes. Remember that old pickup truck you used to drive, Mark? I asked, my voice deceptively calm. His eyes narrowed. Yeah, what about it? It's still registered in my name, I said, meeting his gaze directly. Remember? You couldn't get a loan back then, so I co-signed for you, and we just never got around to transferring the title. A look of dawning horror spread across his face. He knew where this was going. That truck, I continued, my voice gaining strength, is worth a decent amount of money, enough to cover a significant portion of what you took from me. He started to protest, but I held up my hand, cutting him off. Here's the deal, Mark. You have 1 week. 1 week to return at least 80% of the money you took from my account. If I don't see that money in my account by this time next week, I'm reporting that truck stolen. His jaw dropped. You wouldn't. I looked him straight in the eye, my expression unwavering. Try me, Mark. Emily and I deserve that house. and I'm done being your safety net. Family first, right? Well, my daughter is my family first. And you just messed with her future. I stood up, leaving a few bills on the table to cover my coffee. The choice is yours, Mark. You know where to find me. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving him sitting there, stunned. The air outside felt cleaner, crisper. A weight had lifted off my shoulders, replaced by a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in years. The fear was still there, the uncertainty about the future, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control. And that felt damn good. The week that followed felt like a tightrope walk. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls and texts from Mark, each one more desperate and accusatory than the last. He swung between pleading for forgiveness and outright threats, painting me as the villain who was tearing our family apart over a little bit of money. He even tried to get Mom involved, hoping she could sway me with her guilt trips. Mom called me nearly every day, her voice laced with disappointment and concern. Sarah, how could you do this to your own brother? He made a mistake, yes, but he's family. You can't just threaten to report him to the police. Mom, I'd reply, my voice weary. He didn't just make a mistake. He took our down payment. He lied to me, and he showed absolutely no remorse until I gave him an ultimatum. But the truck, Sarah, that's his livelihood, she'd protest. And that money was our future, Mom. I'd say, my voice hardening. He didn't seem to care about that. I've always been there for Mark, always bailed him out. But enough is enough. I have to think about Emily now. The conversations were draining, leaving me feeling guilty and isolated. It hurt to have Mom take Mark's side, to feel like I was the one causing the rift. There were moments, especially late at night when the apartment felt particularly quiet, that I questioned my decision. Had I been too harsh? Should I have just forgiven him like I always had before? But then I'd look at Emily, asleep in her bed, her face peaceful and trusting, and the doubt would fade. I was doing this for her. I was finally putting her needs, our needs, first. Mark's friends and some of our more distant relatives also started reaching out, echoing his narrative of the heartless sister persecuting her struggling brother. I kept my responses short and factual, simply stating that Mark had taken my savings without permission and I was trying to recoup what I could. As the days ticked by, and the deadline I'd given Mark loomed closer, the tension in the air became almost palpable. I checked my bank account multiple times a day, hoping to see a deposit, any deposit, but nothing. The day before the deadline, my phone rang. It was Mark, his voice surprisingly subdued. Sarah, he said quietly, I can't get the money. Not all of it. I know, Mark, I replied, my voice flat. There was a long silence. Then he said almost in a whisper, So you're really going to do it? You're going to report the truck stolen? I don't have a choice, Mark, I said, the words heavy with a sadness I hadn't anticipated. You left me with no other option. The next morning, true to my word, I made the call. Reporting the truck stolen felt like a final, irreversible act, a severing of a tie that had bound us for so long. It was a difficult, painful thing to do, but as I hung up the phone, a strange sense of calm washed over me. The anxiety of waiting, of hoping he would do the right thing, was gone. The decision had been made. The fallout was immediate and intense. Mark bombarded me with angry, tearful voicemails. Mom was beside herself, accusing me of being vindictive. Some family members stopped speaking to me altogether. For a while, I felt incredibly lonely. The familiar comfort of family gatherings felt tainted, the easy camaraderie replaced by an awkward silence whenever my name was mentioned. I missed the old Mark, the one who made me laugh, the one I shared childhood memories with. But that Mark, I realized, had been slowly disappearing for years, replaced by someone entitled and manipulative. Despite the initial loneliness, a sense of empowerment began to grow within me. I had stood up for myself. I had set a boundary, a firm line in the sand, and I had refused to back down, even when it was difficult and uncomfortable. It was the first time in a long time that I had truly prioritized my own needs and the needs of my daughter over the expectations and demands of others. I started to reflect on our family dynamics, the unspoken roles we had all played for so many years. I had always been the giver, the fixer, the one who smoothed things over. Mark had always been the taker, the one who needed help, the one who was always forgiven. And Mom, bless her heart, had always tried to keep the peace, often at my expense. I realized that by always enabling Mark, by always being the dependable one who picked up the pieces, I had inadvertently contributed to the situation. I had allowed him to believe that he could always rely on me no matter what. And in the process, I had neglected my own needs and desires. The missing down payment was a harsh lesson, a painful wake-up call. But it was also a catalyst for change. I started to understand that my self-worth wasn't tied to how much I could give to others. I deserved to have my own dreams, my own goals, and I deserved to protect them. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, about setting healthy boundaries, and about finally putting myself and Emily first. The guilt started to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of strength. I had made a difficult choice, but it was the right one. Months drifted by, each one bringing a subtle shift in the landscape of my life. The initial storm of family drama eventually subsided, leaving a quiet, somewhat empty space. Mark, stripped of his truck and facing the consequences of his actions, had become a distant figure, his calls growing less frequent and increasingly bitter. Mom still called, but our conversations were shorter, more strained. The easy intimacy we once shared felt fractured, replaced by a cautious politeness. Yet, amidst the quiet, something new was blossoming. Without the constant worry of bailing Mark out or the underlying resentment of being taken for granted, I found myself with more energy and focus. I picked up an extra cleaning job, pouring my newfound determination into earning back the lost savings. Emily, sensing the shift in our household, stepped up in her own way, taking on more chores and offering unwavering support with her usual teenage enthusiasm. Slowly but surely, the house fund jar started to gain weight again. Each dollar dropped and felt like a small victory, a testament to my resilience and the strength of our little family unit. We started new traditions, Friday night pizza and movie nights, weekend hikes in the nearby park, creating a sense of normalcy and joy that had been overshadowed by the constant family drama. One sunny afternoon, while Emily was at a school event, I found myself browse online real estate listings again. This time, the excitement felt different, more grounded, less tinged with the anxiety of potential setbacks. I even scheduled a few viewings with Mrs. Henderson. The blue house on Elm Street had been sold, but there were other possibilities, other dreams waiting to be realized. A few weeks later, I found it a cozy little bungalow with a surprisingly large backyard, just a short bike ride from Emily's school. It wasn't the blue house, but it had its own charm, its own potential for creating new memories. This time, when I signed the paperwork, the feeling wasn't just excitement. It was a deep sense of accomplishment, of having earned this, of having built this future for myself and Emily. The move was a flurry of boxes and laughter, friends pitching in to help us settle into our new home. Emily finally got her puppy, a scruffy terrier mix we named Lucky. The backyard became our sanctuary, filled with the happy barks of a dog and the scent of the small vegetable garden I finally planted. Life wasn't perfect. There were still moments when I thought of Mark, a pang of sadness mixed with a lingering resentment. But the constant weight of his needs and his manipulations was gone, replaced by a lightness I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The experience taught me a valuable lesson, one that I wish I had learned sooner. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from toxic relationships, even when those relationships are with family. It's not easy. It's painful and often comes with guilt and judgment from others. But protecting your own well-being, prioritizing your own dreams, is not selfish. It's necessary for survival and for building a life filled with genuine happiness. If you've ever found yourself in a similar situation, feeling drained and exploited by those closest to you, know that you're not alone. It takes courage to set boundaries and to say enough. It takes strength to choose your own peace over the expectations of others. But the freedom and self-respect you gain in return are immeasurable. If you have thoughts or experiences to share, please leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your stories. And if you found this story relatable or empowering, please give it a like and subscribe for more personal narratives of resilience and self-discovery. You deserve to build a life filled with joy and respect, and sometimes that means making the difficult choice to let go of those who hold you back.